I'm Julie Washington. I am a professor and head of the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at Georgia State, which trains speech-language pathologists, so I'm a health scientist. And I do this because for 20 years, I was on the panels at the National Institute of Health and the only African-American person on those panels for 20 years. So I decided that I would quit them and that my time was better spent trying to feed the pipeline and train African-American scientists who can do data-based research and are competitive for NIH grants and publication in Tier 1 journals. So that's what I'm doing. And my person is Sister Rosemary.
I am Dr. Lydia Carlis. Lydia is great for the rest of the day. I only use doctor when I need to. And it's not that uncommon in this room. I am a consultant now. I was a nonprofit executive focusing on early childhood instructional models and building them and evaluating them with an organization called Apple Tree in Washington, D.C. And I have been an entrepreneur for 4 years this July, working with schools and nonprofits to help answer questions of impact for kids who look like me and my daughter. My why is that I am from Arkansas. I'm proud of it. I did not try to lose my accent. Y'all gonna hear all of it up here today. And I saw the inequities from my parents being sharecroppers to me seeing opportunities that were not presented to other students who look like me. So now I want to make sure that our children get to be the heroes and heroines of a history that has not yet been made. That's Dr. Cynthia James, not me. And my person is Dr. Howard Gardner from Howard University because he convinced me to change my major from criminal justice to physics so that I could go to law school. And that has set me on the path to education. Okay. So just wanted to start with this quote that data are just summaries of thousands of stories. And so our goal was to unpack some of the data that we heard from our colleagues in the previous part by listening to the voices of the people who are doing the work to get the outcomes that people closest to the work to get the outcomes that we're trying to get. And I also want to say that both Julie and I are quantitative researchers. We are not qualitative researchers, but because we have learned through all of our studies that if you don't get the teachers on board and you don't understand what they care about, your stuff's gonna fail. So we have to want to hear from them and understand what they have to say to us, and then do some of it. So our methods, we came up with our questions in September of last year, and this was the main one. What are U.S. teachers' experiences and perceptions of educating African American students in public schools, both district and charter? And then we started collecting survey responses. We had a 2-week window because learned that having a longer period was not gonna help us more. We incentivized with participation with the $100 daily drawing, so the earlier you completed, the more opportunities you had to win. We did find out that did not help us. We ended with 600 responses, but 400 of them came on the last day when we put out our final call.
So I want to say something here. Someone said earlier about how important it was, it might have been Ron, about having like young people and not so young people
Young-ish.
working together. And one of the things that Lydia did with these survey responses are things I never would have done, which was, it was all electronic, put out calls on Facebook everywhere and got 600 responses in 2 weeks. That's like a researcher's dream to be able to get that many respondents in that amount of time, but it was using technology that we were able to accomplish it.
Woo woo tech. We engaged a qualitative data analyst because, again, this is not our area of expertise, to uncover the emerging themes for us. She came up with pretty much the same thing that we use Excel to count because we're quantitative people. She came up with pretty similar emerging themes because I know there's data involved, there's numerical things involved. And we looked for the relationships between the teacher responses and the Middletown results. So these are all the demographics that we asked teachers for, and they gave us all of this information. And then they had everything else so they gave us all those demographics, and we got these 600 responses from 37 states and DC. 50% of the responses came from those states. This was our dissemination strategy. Facebook by far gave us the most responses, and using the groups. So I joined groups, not under guise. I told them in the application, this is what I'm trying to do, and then they allowed me to join and ask. And then, before we go to this, I just want to say we had 600 respondents, only 44 were male. Only 44 were male. And the most males we got were from a teacher we both know. We asked him.
In New Jersey.
He texted other male teachers. But we were not successful in getting males through any of these online strategies. The women and the white women, for real, came on through. But males, we were not successful. So if you have ideas, we still want to hear from them. And that'll be later in the 20 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
So one of the questions we asked teachers, because we hear this a lot, especially in urban districts, if there weren't residency restrictions, would you allow your children to enroll in the school that you currently serve? Okay? Because a lot of teachers, especially black teachers, work in schools that they would never send their kids to. And so what we found by just looking at this question generally was that 43% said no, 57% said yes. When we looked at that question by race, the white or Caucasian teachers actually said yes much more often than black or African American teachers did. And we had a sense of that just from the work that you do in schools, that a lot of African American teachers are teaching in districts and in schools where there's high risk and high need, and teachers are middle class and tend not to want their students to be educated in the schools they teach in. And this gives you a little bit about who the respondents were. 231 African American, a lot of white, mostly women, 27 Hispanic, so they didn't answer much either, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islanders, etc. So this is a word cloud, and these are the words we saw most often in the responses. And so some of it was related to the questions that we asked. So we asked 7 open-ended questions, things like, what makes your job easier? What makes your job harder? Do you see different needs for your African American students than other students? Do you see differences in the needs of African American boys versus girls? And so just some fairly general open-ended questions designed to get teachers talking. We were impressed that we said in each one of those, because some of those are like yes, no questions, please explain. And they really did explain. And so we got a lot of people taking the time to give us the explanations about what their answers meant. And so that's what we're going to talk about with these emerging themes. So culturally responsive pedagogy and curriculum. We've heard that a lot today. That came up a lot in these responses, that teachers were aware that a lot of the things that they were doing aren't really meeting the needs of African American kids. This is a specific quote from a teacher in Texas. Teachers need to be willing to ask difficult questions about their own practice and their own ethnocentrism as it affects their classrooms. We have to become more critically reflective as a profession in order to become more culturally responsive and humble in our practice. Some of this mirrors some of the things Arnitha said this morning. Number 2, implicit bias training. So this came up a lot, and this is one of those, as Chris was talking about the buzzwords, everybody's talking about equity. Well, everybody's also talking about implicit bias. And we went to a session last night at the film festival where one of the doctors who was on this panel said, it is not implicit bias, it is explicit racism. And the fact that we sort of soften it doesn't make it softer for kids, and it doesn't make it not racism. It's not bias, it's racism, okay? So this teacher says, my job is made, from North Carolina, my job is made harder by the fact that no one at my school believes they are racist. And yet many of them show implicit bias against our minority students on a consistent basis. More training on implicit bias, and administrators who are willing to call out this bias are needed. We heard a lot about administrators and what schools wish the administrators, teachers wish administrators were doing for them. Number 3, African American student and teacher isolation. There are a lot of teachers, just like we talked about in here today at our table, about being the only one in the schools that we went to. I went to a Catholic girls' high school, that's where Sister Rosemary was, and there were 5 African American students in each grade. That means 20. I think that was a quota. What do you think? Okay? 5 in each grade, not one less, not one more ever. Okay? And so these teachers are talking about feeling isolated themselves and their students being isolated in these schools. We need people in capacities that indicate all ethnicity capabilities. Why are the only 2 African American staff members aides? So they're not teachers, they're aides. Did we not have anyone else apply? I truly believe that when minorities see themselves as principals and educators and superintendents, as opposed to the way popular culture portrays them, we will see a beautiful paradigm shift. It starts with us, okay? Yes, and we agree with her. And we know it's a her, because it's a teacher. Sorry. Sorry. All right. And number 4, confidence and value. This is about the students. So some of the answers were teacher-focused. They were really teacher-centric. Some were student-centric. Interestingly, not many of them actually were about academics. They were about the barriers to learning and the barriers to academics more than they were about things like math and reading, okay? Our academic data is strong, but I would love to see more resources to support teachers in approaching broader issues like self-confidence and advocacy and race and equity. With even our younger students in an age-appropriate way, I'd also love to see more programming designed for other schools that might be majority white to ensure that those children and teachers are also getting the same education and exposure and are aware of their own privilege in age-appropriate ways so that they can be anti-racist. And this is Washington, D.C. I was talking to Chris earlier, and I'm at Georgia State, and people think because it's in downtown Atlanta, there are a lot of black students. Well, not in graduate school. And we train graduate students. And I had a meeting with my African American graduate students, and they told me it's so hard being a student here because every day I feel like I have to change the way I talk, the way I move, the way that I act in this environment. And when I go home at night, I am exhausted. Yes. And so if you think that's true with African American students who are 25, think about for these younger kids in these schools where there aren't that many of them, where they're always trying to fit in. And I agree with Chris completely. I believe that we assimilate so much as people, nobody knows who we are. That my students have assimilated so well that the white students can't tell that you're different because you're just like them when you're here. So
you did not, unfortunately all the slides weren't printed, but these were emailed to you, right, before the session, so you can read all of the remaining responses later. We're gonna go through these really quickly. Access to quality education was the fifth emerging theme. And we gave you this one because it's important to realize this was not all puppies and roses. This was not, all teachers who are anti-racist responding. We had some responses that we were like, whoa, but those are real teachers who are in front of our children teaching them. And so if we don't understand and work with them to support these mindset shifts that have to happen, then we're gonna have a bigger problem and a more longer term problem. So this was representative of about 20% of the 600, I would say about 20% were, it's the parents, it's the community, the kids are unmotivated, like those kinds of things. And the test was also there, yes. 6, administrative support and involvement, that they need the leaders like us who are in the room to be working with them and with families. So I want to read this one out because it was so, it was striking. My administration makes my job extremely difficult. They use all the buzzwords to sound like we are a completely supportive, caring community, but they drop the ball when it comes to showing care and practical support to staff and children. They don't understand how their actions and decisions really affect children, staff, and families, and they don't really mean it when they ask the professional community for input. They often make decisions based on outside agendas rather than take the experience and knowledge from our own staff. This is something we have to be correcting for. And they did also say that students, we have to be listening to student voices as well. That came up less, but it was in there, in that same area. Finally, and this was actually the most common response, life outside of school is a greatest concern. My greatest concern for the students I serve are that, 1, other things, outside influences, keep them from focusing on getting a conventional education. They're getting plenty of street education. 2nd, this lack of knowledge and ability to focus will bar them from escaping the circumstances creating the situation in the first place. This was I think we had over 200 responses that talked about life outside of school, but not in the so we can't do anything way. In the this is a real issue that we have to address and confront while we are educating and as part of the education for our children.
And when it comes to the work that they did at Middletown, these are the areas that we saw that teachers talked about that you were talked about in your data. And that is collaborative governance that considers and agrees upon the needs of African American students if we're ever going to be equitable. A mindset shift, we heard that a lot. And some of that issue about bias is also about mindset. And so this was very, very common. And a pedagogical shift that supports the use of data and culturally relevant curricular options is essential. We saw culturally relevant pedagogy a lot, and everywhere I go, I hear people talk about culturally relevant pedagogy, but even when they say they're doing it, they're not really. Because I believe that, like many things, it's one of those buzzwords that people know they should be doing, but it's not operationalized in a way that they actually can do it or know how to do it. I believe that the desire's there, but the guidance doesn't exist. And so that's something that I think is important for us to think about, because teachers are aware that it's an issue. I don't know if they heard it in professional development or if they mean it from their hearts, but it came up a lot. So
we were surprised that so many teachers said, you can contact us. We want to talk about this some more. And these were all long form responses. Teachers are busy, this is their summer vacation. They spent time writing paragraphs and said, please ask us some more questions because we want to help you fix this issue. So this is not something they don't care about.
And we're going back to them. The ones who said they would respond again, we will go back to them and ask them more directed questions instead of sort of the general open-ended ones that we did. This was a good start, but teachers can teach us a lot. And I personally do not believe we should be talking about education without teachers' voices. that we can, as researchers, I can talk about anything I want to. I can talk about what I believe is important, but unless the teachers' voices are in there, we're not actually always doing the things that they think are important. And as a result, they won't do them. Excuse me? And the students, absolutely. So Lydia loved this quote, so I'm going to let her take over this one. This is our woke white teacher.
She wouldn't say she is woke, which is
we said
why,
it's
yes.
woke.
We need to do a better job of hiring teachers who represent our students and the diversity within the Black community. The Black community is diverse linguistically, ethnically, culturally, etc., and we need teachers in schools that reflect that diversity. Until we enfranchise future generations of teachers by offering Black students high-quality, rigorous education, we will not see the shift in our teaching force that we need to best serve these students. That's the truth. That's what we need to be focused on.
And it's the bottom line.
Boom.
Yes.
So, this is what we want to hear from you now, and we hope you'll be thinking about as we go into our groups to do design thinking work and pitches. How might we use what teachers want and what we know from the data that is demonstrated as effective to create programs or practices that are used and useful, so that teachers find useful and that they are going to use? So how might we do that? I think that is that's a problem that we need to focus on for teacher interventions if that's where we're going to go.
Yes, and I think also, just on this one, that malleable factors are something that this group is always talking about. Things that we actually can change. There are a lot of things that we know are impacting student outcomes. We can't change all of them, but there are a lot of things that we know that we can change. And so what we are challenging ourselves and this group to do is to, based upon what teachers have said to us, find those factors that are malleable and try to act upon them.
One more round of applause for these great folks.